some of you that you're wondering if this is water, and I can assure you it is. My dad used to clear his throat a lot. And even now, I can still hear him clear his throat. And as I'm battling this cold, you might hear my dad clear his throat through me. My mom would love to tell the story that when they delivered me home from the hospital, that it wasn't too long before from the crib they heard me clearing my throat, just like my dad. And I was very surprised that last night at about 7 o'clock, I was hungry, and Tina was kind of fiddling with her phone, and we had had a very late lunch, and we really hadn't talked about dinner. And I found myself standing in the kitchen, and I was rubbing my hands like this, and I went, oh my gosh, that's exactly what my dad would do when he was hungry. He would go into the kitchen and he'd stand like this, and it would like drive my mom insane because she knew exactly what that meant. And so I tried to put my hands behind my back, but it was too late. I had been spotted. So do that. Our reading today, or our text today, is from Ephesians chapter 5, and the commentary that I use breaks up the scriptures in sections, and that's kind of how, when I plan a sermon series or such, I kind of follow that commentary. And the actual whole text that the commentary was using was Ephesians 5, 1 through 17. Well, I wanted to go easy on my literature, so I didn't read half all 17 verses shared. But Ephesians 5 starts out saying, be imitators of God as dear children, and walk in love as Christ also had loved us and given himself for us, an offering and a sacrifice to God. And so that's kind of why you began to hear some stories about imitation. I will never forget, and if I've told this story before, forgive me, and just remember that I have gray hair too, so I can't remember everything that I've told you. But when I moved into my dream apartment, when life was starting all over for me, that I was trying to find the smoke alarm that needed the battery replaced. You know that chirp sound? And I'm in this unfamiliar surroundings, and I hear it, and I'm like, oh, I think it came from here. And no, couldn't be there. A little bit later, I'd hear it again, and I'd go to a different part of the apartment. I could never find where it was. Well, a smoke alarm needing a battery is a safety issue. I want to find that. And after chasing around for maybe an hour and not getting anywhere, I was like, I'll just call the landlord. He lives right upstairs. Maybe he can help. So he came down. Now, just so that you can appreciate the landlord, he has wrists probably about this big around, and just a big man and a big bushy beard, and definitely somebody that you want to like you as opposed to the other. And so I wanted to stay at his good graces, and I hope I'm not troubling you, but this is the issue that I have. And he said, well, let's just sit down and listen to it. And so we sat down, and sure enough, there was the noise, and I'm like, that's it. And he just smiled, and he said, that's my parrot. He had an African gray parrot, about this big, by the name of Shadow, that could imitate sounds like you can't believe. And he certainly had me fooled. He had me fooled. Now, we're in church. I can't go into full detail, but I'll just say that parrot could swear pretty good too. And I had some interesting stories from that as well that I just can't share from the pulpit. But that parent had me running all over. You could imitate that sound like you couldn't believe. And we are told about imitation that we are to be imitators of Christ. That when people see us, they see Christ. As a matter of fact, when we look at the word Christian, in its most literal sense, it is to mean little Christ. That when people see us, they see Jesus Christ in love, in grace, in truth, in righteousness, and they see that in us through the way that we act and through the way that we prioritize our life and through the things that we value. Now, we didn't read the text, but the text goes into a lot of things to avoid. That imitators of Christ do not participate in these things. And it lists several things. And rather than go through and to itemize, you can do that reading on your own. But it certainly makes it clear that what we know of Jesus in terms of purity, in terms of morality, in terms of righteousness, in terms of that these are to be things that define us, and not things such as covetousness, not things such as driven by our appetite and doing whatever whim seems to please us. We are instead driven by the higher principle of seeking not only the good of all people, but to also bring about things that bring about goodness and glory to the God that we serve. He puts it in another way. He said, you are not in darkness, but you are the light, and walk as children of the light. There's a wonderful rule at State, well, I probably shouldn't say where I work since it'll be on YouTube. Where I work, they have a nice rule about the email system that we have. And it's this: understand that we monitor, we being the company, monitor everything you say in email. And you should always write with the understanding that it could be on the front page of any newspaper or read in a courtroom, in a court case. So as long as you keep that in mind, you'll be fine. Live in the light, right? When there's no fear of a police officer if you're not doing anything wrong, right? And that's kind of what we are reminded of here, that we are to walk in the light, to shun darkness, to allow light to dispel darkness in our life, and that brings about three things: goodness, righteousness, and truth. And so if we wish to understand what the will of God is for us, those three words will help keep us in focus. Is this direction leading me towards goodness, wholeness, completeness, not taking advantage of someone else? Is it leading in a way of righteousness, and is it leading in a way of truth and deception? And when we think of truth, I like to think, is this something that if it's on a billboard on I-94 and everybody can read it or read about it, and I'm okay with that, then that's truth, right? And we should be comfortable with that. I came across the word, and as I pondered this, we were called to be imitators, not impersonators. There's a subtle difference. Somebody that does an impersonation, I think, is somebody that's looking to just do it for a very short time for a very specific reason, be it for entertainment or perhaps to manipulate for their own good. There's been many a person that tries to come across as a nice moral individual so that they can gain your trust, and then what? So then they can take away from your assets or take away from something that you own valuable. We are called to search our hearts and to ask ourselves, am I impersonating or am I truly imitating, looking to be a little Christ to the world and to the community that I serve? I love a story that Philip Yancey shares in a book that's all about being an imitator of God. Dr. Paul Brand is actually kind of who's telling his story here. Dr. Paul Brand is a man who devoted his life to being a doctor in India, to the poor in India. And Philip Yancey wrote 2 books with Dr. Brand, and this is the second. And you can see from the worn cover, I've had it for a long time, and I valued the book very much. Here's this example from, as told by Dr. Brand. Curtains screened my group of 10 interns and medical students from the rest of the 40-bed ward. Externally, the Christian Medical College Hospital in Vellore resembled a modern Western facility, but inside it was all Indian. Activity throbbed just beyond our curtain. Families bringing in home-cooked food and nurses chasing away the scavengers that followed, like crows and an occasional monkey. Those of us inside the curtains, however, were giving full attention to our young colleague as he made his diagnosis. He was half kneeling in the posture I taught him, with his warm hand slipped under the sheet and resting on the patient's bare abdomen. While his fingers probed gently for telltale signs of distress, he continued a line of questioning that showed he was weighing the possibility of appendicitis against an ovarian infection. Suddenly, something caught my eye. A slight twitch of movement on the intern's face. Was it the eyebrow arching upward? A vague memory stirred in my mind, but one I could not fully recall. His questions were leading into a delicate area, especially for the Hindu society. Had the woman ever been exposed to a venereal infection? The intern's facial muscles contracted into an expression combining sympathy, inquisitiveness, and disarming warmth as he looked straight in the patient's face and asked the questions. His very countenance coaxed the woman to relax, put aside the awkwardness, and tell us the truth. At that moment, my memory snapped into place. Of course, the left eyebrow cocked up with the right one trailing down, the wry, enticing smile, the head tilted to one side, the twinkling eyes. These were the unmistakable features of my old chief surgeon in London, Professor Robin Pilcher. I sucked in my breath sharply and exclaimed. The students looked up, startled by my reaction. I could not help it. It seemed as if the intern had studied Professor Pilcher's face for an acting audition and was now drawing from his repertoire to impress me. Answering their questioning looks, I explained to myself, that is the face of my old chief. What a coincidence. You have exactly the same expression. Yet you've never been to England, and Pilcher certainly has never visited India. At first, the students stared at me in confused silence. Finally, 2 or 3 of them grinned. "We don't know any Professor Pilcher," one said, "but Dr. Brand, that was your expression he was wearing." What expression do you wear? What expression do I wear? May it be the expression of Jesus Christ, who brings forth goodness, righteousness, truth, grace, justice, and love. Many times in the church, for whatever reason, people feel the need to be policemen. And I don't understand why, but they feel that it is their job to enforce rules to their fellow Christians. I like a policeman, and I consider their work noble when they save someone in distress, when they bring about stability in an unstable situation, when they restore order into a place of chaos, when they help to actually solve a case and preserve and protect property and life and that. But I don't care much for a police officer that finds their calling to write parking tickets. In the church, we have a lot of people sometimes that we like to write parking tickets, when instead maybe we are called to imitate Christ and to help bring about goodness and righteousness and truth. I often like to say, I love to fish, and we are called to be fishers of men. But I don't care to clean fish very much. Leave that work to the Holy Spirit and start by allowing that to work in your life and not worry as much about whoever else. That, I think, is the greatest criticism that we hear against the American church in this day. That you say one thing and you act with a pettiness that denies everything that you say. Let us instead act in a way that people go, "Oh my gosh, that's how Jesus would act. That faith is real. I need to pay attention to that." May they see Jesus in you. May you see Jesus in me. And from that, may we bring forth a bountiful harvest to our Lord of sowing righteousness, peace, joy, and grace in the world that we live. Amen.
Amen.